Hello, and welcome to this episode of Book Talk. Today, I am delighted to have my good friend Jen Turano back as we talk about her new book, Meeting Her Match. This is the third in a series, and as always, it is a book that had me laughing out loud as only Jen can do. So, Jen, welcome back. Do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll start talking about this delightful book?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me again, Kara. It is always a pleasure to be on here. As she said, I'm Jen Turano. I write historical romantic comedies set in the Gilded Age, which is like, I think I'm up to like 1885 or 1886, somewhere around there. And yes, Meeting Her Match is the third and final series of the Matchmaker series, just
Yes,
completed.
and so meeting her match is so much fun. You've got this matchmaker who meets her match, and that, he's just this guy who's actually not looking to be matched. He's looking for help with his sister. But from the moment they meet, it's just absolute chaos in the way that only you do chaos. I mean, there's raccoons falling out of trees, there's horses going crazy, there's falling into rivers, there's everything. How do you come up with all this madcap? I mean, it's like a Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, like escapade from page one. So, how did you come up with those like introductory scenes where it's just absolute chaos?
Well, so for me, it's always you want to give your characters like something is going to happen to them, but for me, it's like have something happen to them that's like on steroids. So I couldn't. So Camilla's been in. She was just mentioned in the first book of the series, A Match in the Making, and then she showed up more into Spark a Match. She was Adelaide's. I'm hoping that's the right character. But anyway, she was the best friend of that character, and
I'm so
then
glad I'm not the only one who does that, where you're like, is this the right character name? I think it is, but
I
I've
think
written
it is,
three
but I'm
books
not.
instead.
Yeah, like that was. I mean, you know how it is. By the time you actually get to where your book is going to be released, you're already through with like another book or two. So you have to
Yep.
kind of So to Spark a Match, which came out in November, that's been a while ago. But Camilla was in that one, and she's very, very proper. And she's just the poster child for the New York 400, which is New York high society. That's what they called themselves. They were called
Yep.
the New York 400. So it was very snobby, and she's grown up in that environment. So I had to think of something that would really take her out of her world. So I decided that she would be great with a character who was not polished, Owen. And so then I thought, well, okay, there has to be raccoons. And I don't know why I decided on raccoons. And you know what I mean? It just added that extra. It was a way to get them to meet in an unusual meeting, of course. And it also was a way to have them part ways with each other without really knowing who each other's, who they were. And because anytime raccoons like basically fall from the sky, there's going to be, you know what I mean, it's a break
Yeah.
in the scene, so to speak. So
Yeah.
that's how that happened. But yeah, they just I have been chased numerous times on the trail by raccoons. I'm always taking these trails, and though there's, especially like this time of year, it's tricky because there's the mama raccoons with all the babies. And my dog Remy and I like to go off trail, and we're constantly running into raccoons. So I have been chased by raccoons numerous times. So some of the stuff I pull from real life, what I do. So there you go. That's where the raccoons come from.
I love that. And it's one of those where it's just this utter like chaos, but there's so much humor and fun. But at the same time, she's already looking for trouble. I mean, it's like from before the first page, she's on edge. She's looking for trouble. And he's just sitting there going, what is this? I just want to set up something for my sister. And so you've created this tension and this mismatch from the beginning. And you do this successfully, book after book after book after book. Does it get harder to come up with those scenarios, or does your mind just work that way where you're just like, you just look around life and you're like, oh, look, there's another crazy scenario I could put my characters through?
I think it does it gets harder to keep things fresh is what I think is the hardest part. I'm not sure what number book this is. I'm in the 20s now, and it does, like, you don't want to have the same characters again and again and again, or the same situations or whatever. So yeah, so I sometimes I think I get a little bit too outlandish, or because you want to keep it fresh, and you've got to do something new and different. And that's one reason why I took her Camilla and I took her to Wheeling, West Virginia, because that's taking her completely out of her world. And I've been wanting to do a book set in near Wheeling because I grew up 12 miles away from Wheeling, West Virginia, in a town called St. Clairsville, Ohio. And I've been really wanting to go back into that area. And so I thought, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. He's going to be from that area. And the cool thing is that, you know how when you grow up in a place, there's all this history, but you're unfamiliar with it because you don't bother to find out. So I started asking people about Wheeling, just my Facebook friends, people from the Ohio Valley, and they came up with all sorts of things. So somebody had said she worked as a nurse at one of the hospitals in Wheeling, and she's like, "Did yeah, well, yeah, you got to include that nail manufacturing plant." And I'm like, nail manufacturing plant. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, so I started investigating. It was like that Wheeling, West Virginia was the nail capital of the country. They sold more nails from Wheeling than anywhere. And they also, during the Gilded Age, there was more capita per income or income per capita than New York City. So there were all these really, really wealthy people there, and I had no idea. So it was fascinating. And I included Stone and Thomas department store, Kara. That's where I worked in high school. Yes, I did. And working at Stone and Thomas is why I majored in fashion.
That is so fun. And that's
See,
where, I mean, it is. That's when you write a book about your hometown. Because my first book was about my hometown during World War II. And it was the same thing. I remember walking around and looking up at the buildings and just seeing everything through different eyes, even though I had lived in that town for years. But just now that I was looking at it as an author and looking for details and looking just for those story elements, it was completely a new experience. And so,
mhm.
and even doing that with Lafayette, where I live now, I mean, like, oh, this place I love to go all the time with my kids, I'm like, it was called something completely different during World War II, but it was still here. And, like the nail plant. I mean, who would have thought,
I would have
Wheeling being,
never thought. So that gave Owen, it gave him his career because
yeah,
he runs a nail manufacturing plant. And what else is there? Oh, if you go to Wheeling Island, um, it's they've kind of some of that area is starting to come back. But once they started building malls downtown Wheeling, it was one of those cool. All the stores were outside. The department stores, they had like a plaza you walk through. Well, it nobody went there anymore. They all went to the Ohio Valley Mall, and so it kind of died. So there is kind of they have been bringing stuff back. They're trying to redo it. But when you go to Wheeling Island, there's all these cool Victorian houses. And when I was growing up, they always seemed like they were in complete disrepair. But they're really up high. They're built up high. And I never realized, I don't know, maybe because I must be like an idiot because I didn't think about it, but it's an island in the middle of the Ohio River. So it floods all the time. So the houses are built up high. So when it floods, there we go. Who knew? Something I never thought about. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
well, and that's the fun thing about research is, you're always learning all these details. So what's the most unique detail that you learned while you were researching that you're like, oh, I wish I could put this in the book, but if I did, it would just be superfluous. It wouldn't do anything for the story.
Let's see. Well, I got people sent me a lot of like the local foods that I was unfamiliar with, and I didn't put as much information about ramps. Have you ever heard of ramps?
No.
Well, I had heard of them before because somebody on my Facebook page went to like there was a ramps festival down like by Athens, Ohio, and I had no idea what ramps were. Well, it turns out you find them in like creek beds, and they're almost like onions, and people cook them up in that area. And that festival, if you go to that festival, you can. I guess they're really, really smelly. You can smell them from like 10 miles away. But if you ingest these ramps, they stick with you. And you will literally stink because it comes through your pores. So I found out all this other stuff about ramps that would not have been cool to add because everyone would have been like, ew. I mean, there is a point in there where one of the guys, I believe it was the one-legged carriage man by the name of Nems, he had ingested some ramps before. I think the rule was you're not supposed to eat ramps after Thursday because you don't want to be the stink in church. I literally saw that somewhere. I like, or somebody told me like they found it in an article. So I did include that, but I didn't do all this, everything about ramps because some of it was quite nasty. But I just found that fascinating. I didn't even know. I'd never even heard of ramps before, but apparently people eat them around where I grew up. I had no idea.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. But yeah, those are the details that sometimes you're like, man, I would love to include all of this, but if I did, either my editor is going to take it out or it's just going to be because I found it interesting.
Yeah, and you know what? Like they do like I mean, I don't know about you, but I get really into the research. So like I was having them travel down like Main Street in Wheeling and I was talking about all the shops that cuz some of them I remember were still there. There was a cigar manufacturing plant. And if you drive over this bridge, like there is the suspension bridge is still in Wheeling. It's one of the oldest suspension bridges in the country. But then there's a newer bridge, right? That I think they're
Mhm.
Fort Henry, or I can't remember exactly. But if you drive off that and you veer over into Wheeling, there's this brick building, and on there, it's still the advertisement for the cigars, the stogies that were manufactured. It's really faded, but it's really cool. But it's something I never thought about when, I mean, I kind of remembered seeing a cigar advertisement, but yeah. So
Yeah, the things that you just drive by and don't really sink in
you
and you
don't
go,
know.
why is that here? That's so
Yes.
funny. So this is the last book in a series, which then means you have to start thinking about what's next. Because I'm writing the last book in a series right now. And then it's always that kind of double edged because you're writing it, but you also have to kind of be thinking about, okay, so what's next? What am I going to pitch next? Because the publisher's asking or you're getting ready to pitch it. So how do you balance that? Because you're also then marketing the other book. So you've got all these
Yeah.
different things going at the same time. So how, I mean, obviously you're probably writing the next one right now. So how did you come up with the idea for the next series while you're working on the book for the last series?
Well, you know what? I have a box, and then when I do a lot of research, that's when I come across like ideas that this would be fun, or like there's this Hetty Green was she was considered the witch of Wall Street. I'm gonna do a book on her because she was a woman in the Gilded Age who she was like a stockbroking wizard, and of course everybody said mean things about her and everything, but there were businesswomen at that time. But so with this one, I was just looking through that box because I had a couple different ideas of what I wanted to do, and I came up with so the next series that I'm going to do, it's the Meriwether Academy for Young Ladies, but it's a Jen Turano book. So it's not your typical academy for young ladies. So what happened during those times, I had read like just like a snippet somewhere. There were finishing schools for the ladies of the New York 400. They were very exclusive. They were very difficult to come in to get into. And so what happened was like you have all these people like okay, so like the Vanderbilts ended up getting included in the New York 400 in like 1883. But before that, they were not allowed. Carolyn Astor said, absolutely not. They were too nouveau riche. They didn't have proper manners. They had all these rules with the New York 400 of who can and cannot be admitted. So before they were admitted into the New York 400, they would have had trouble getting their daughter um, Consuela, she would have had difficulty getting into some of the finest finishing schools in the land. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if I would do like create the Meriwether Academy, and they're going to admit all of these young ladies from the nouveau riche families who are going to be a little rough around the edges because they haven't had the advantages, of basically being born and having a decorum instructor like right there while you're like a toddler. So that's how it is. So I finished the first book. It was due May 1st. I actually turned it a little early, and I'm now working on the second book in that series.
Oh, that sounds like fun. I can't wait to read it.
Yes, it should be. You know what? That book was a little tricky because there's a reason why the Meriwether Academy is formed, right? And it all has to do with Drusilla Meriwether and the family. After the father dies, someone absconds with the Meriwether fortune, the man of affairs. So all of a sudden, they're broke, but it shouldn't be a problem, Kara. Why? Because she is engaged. Mhm. But then the scoundrel of fiance, he tosses her over. because she no longer comes with a dowry. And so there she is. She has no money, no fortune, and no fiance. And but her aunt had given her a house in Chicago. So off she goes to Chicago and she decides she has no marketable skills except for the fact that she's the consummate lady. She knows everything there is to know about etiquette. So she's going to open up an academy on her own. That's where you go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. It sounds so fun. I bet she's going to have some scars and some battle wounds that she's going to have to deal with, I bet.
And there are ravens that make it in. It's not, it turns out it's not just a house, Kara. Mm-mm. It's more on the lines of a castle, and like a creepy castle that would belong in a Gothic novel. Mm-hmm.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it's rumored to be haunted.
Of course. And then you've
And
got
yes, and suits of armor might have been seen strolling around the great room.
I love it. And then you've got all these, rough around the edges, fashionable young ladies who are just a little rough.
Yes, and they need some guidance. Yes, they do. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
There you go.
I love it. It's going to be so fun. So, you're in somewhere in the 20s with your books. You write a lot. You write wonderful award-winning books. What gets easier as you keep writing?
Um, I think what is easier is that I have gone from producing 2 books a year to producing one every 9 months. So I am old.
Whatever.
Yeah, a little older, so it you know what, and you know how it is. It almost gets overwhelming when you were writing a book. You have to pitch the next, if you are on the last book in a series, you're thinking about doing, and I absolutely hate doing synopsis. Like that'll never get easy
Yeah.
for me. But I have to say, like my editors are quite used to me, so I basically give like they're not in depth at all. It looks like what you would find on the back cover of a book jacket, right? And they also are quite familiar with the fact that whenever I turn in that I might be going to write for book 2 and book 3, that's probably not going to happen. So
Yeah.
because I don't know, like they just, once you get into writing, it's where the characters lead me. So but yeah, so I have decided to just do one book every 9 months, which has made it a lot easier for me. Because then so it is easier to do like promotion for a book that's coming out, because I'm not trying to finish a book. And then I was always having like developmental edits would come along for the previous book. And so
Yeah.
then you're doing marketing, developmental edits, you're trying to write a first draft. And then normally then I would get design pages for another book. And it was crazy. So I have given myself a couple extra months. So that's what makes it easier for me.
That's awesome. And then what's the thing that gets harder with each book? Because I think most people think that, oh, the more books you write, it just gets easier. And I think that parts of writing actually get harder the more books that you write.
I think you become more critical of your writing,
Mhm.
so I always have, there's always a time when I have a freak out. Like say like if Publisher Weekly loves a book that just comes out and I'm working on another book, and they give me a nice review, which thank you, right?
Yeah.
But then it freaks me out because then I say, well, what if that's it? What if I've used up every last ounce of humor I have in me and I'm never going to be funny again and it's going to fall flat and all of my readers are going to be disappointed, and and then I'll just have to stop writing. And like that's the most difficult thing. Just like I put a lot of pressure on myself to, because I want the book to be fresh and I want it to be funny. And then sometimes you just get to the point where I'm like, well, I'm not amusing at all. So and then it normally comes out. Like I don't get funny until I edit my book 7 times before I turn it into my editors for the first time. It's just my process. It's how I do it. And I don't start getting funny until like around edit number 5. And then
Oh,
that's when
wow.
you start like clicking. Like you can kind of see a hint of humor. Like the raccoons would be in that scene, right? But it
Mhm.
wasn't fine-tuned and it wasn't what anybody would have said like highly amusing when I first start off. So, and then when I send in those, and then I get back to developmental edits, and then I even fine tune it even more because they will, you know how editors are. They'll be like, like I'm not really sure, like this is kind of dragging down your chapter. So, and then in meeting her match, Um, there was one comment, there were a couple chapters I was just like, I just don't know what's wrong with these. And then my
Yeah.
editor had put in the margin, she goes, "You seem to have a lot of the story happening off the page here." And she was right. It was like I was just explaining what was going on. So I cut that,
Yeah.
and that's when I put the scene with the chicken coop. Like that was
Okay.
not in the original one, and so then that added a little bit more humor to the thing with when Camilla has a run-in with the chicken coop. And that was from real life because chickens do not like me. And I have been in I've only been in I think 3 chicken coops in my life, and every time I have gotten attacked. So
So, moral of the story, stay out of chicken coops.
yes, and be wary of peacocks at the zoo because they can go on the rampage too when you're least expecting it.
Oh my gosh. You and animals, raccoons, chickens,
Mhm.
stay
Yep,
away. Stay
that's right.
away. So, what is an essential characteristic of a hero for you? Because you write great heroes. So, when you're thinking about them, whether you're writing a book or reading a book, what are those essential characteristics?
I just think they need to be genuine, for me, and it's all about like they're incredibly flawed. And I mean my heroines are flawed as well, but
Mhm.
like the heroes, they're not always dashing and debonair. And Owen in this particular, he's very blunt, and he says things that like he shouldn't, and he's never, no
Yeah.
one's ever told him like, well, that's just rude. But what makes him endearing is Camilla will be like, basically, I can't believe you just said that. And he's like, did you find that offensive? I wasn't trying to offend you. And then he modifies his behavior. He tries to learn from those experiences. So yeah. So he's an incredibly flawed character, but he's endearing and he's charming. And you know, and they always, like, for me, like, a hero should have the best interest of the people around him at heart. He should put everybody,
Mhm.
above himself. And and just, and also try to, he has to rescue the heroine quite often, even though most of the time my heroines do not want to consider themselves damsels in distress because they're highly independent.
They are, which is so against the time, which is why I think I love your Gilded
Yeah.
Age, because they're just these independent little vixens.
Yes, they are.
So, if you could be mentored by a famous author, who would you pick?
Who would I pick? Oh, that's a hard one, Kara.
I
Um,
have to ask you tricky questions now.
I know you do. Who would I pick? My mind's going blank. I would say, who would I pick? I really like Susan Elizabeth Phillips. Was one of the first authors I read who, of course, she wrote contemporary romance, which she still writes. But I always just really liked how she was able to. She just has this way of describing her characters, and it just makes them real. She just has this ability to make her characters real. And yeah, I would love to like see her whole mindset on how she actually does it. She has this one book called Ain't She Sweet? And I don't know why, I just remember that she just captured the Southern woman like just amazingly well. And that book always stuck with me just because she was able to do that. So yeah, but also, like, I mean, Tracy Peterson, like, she's just, she's like a rock star in our industry.
Yeah,
So,
she
yeah,
is.
like, yeah, I would definitely benefit from speaking to her as well.
Yeah, I could see where both of those would be fabulous. Okay, so two more questions for you. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to first become a writer?
You know, yes, so I always liked, so Jane Austen was always one of my, from the time I was like really, really young. But I think, in all honesty, it would have to be all the Nancy Drew books
Yes.
because I used to read those. My mom had a collection, and she also had a collection of Beverly Gray books that I read that were very old. Because they were hers when she was young, and she had kept them. And then she had Nancy Drew books, and then the Nancy Drew books that she didn't have in her collection, I used to check out of the library, and I can just remember they had bright pink bindings on them. And I used to,
Yeah.
my dad had made this super cool tree house. We had the forest in our backyard, and it was this wonderful tree house. And we used to play like dress up and stuff up there too. But I would escape there with my books and Trixie Belden books, and I would read
Yes.
for hours. Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. I love Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden. And I also remember reading all the Cherry Ames, with those just old classic mysteries.
Yes.
And Grace Livingston Hill, my grandma had all of those. So I remember reading a ton of those as well. So Meeting Her Match, and it's another classic Gilded Age romp, and so much fun. Definitely a fish out of water tale, but such a great romance. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jen. It's always a delight to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Kara.